We're here today, we're doing Jewish mysticism lessons in Tanya, and we are holding chapter 6, titled Your Darker Side. For the first, so just to summarize, in chapter 1, we spoke about, the Alter Rebbe introduced this concept for the first time, that we have two existences within us, right? There's two neshamot, right? He wrote a verse that says, Uneshamot ani asiti, in the plural, and based on this, he builds the theory, well, based on the Zohar, etc., and other Kabbalistic texts, that there are two souls inside of us. And for the first 4 chapters thereafter, so chapters 2 through 5, the Alter Rebbe dwells on the godly soul, right? We spoke about how the godly soul is made up of, right in the beginning we introduced the 10 powers, and then we slowly spoke about the fact that there are 7 emotional powers and 3 intellectual powers, that the emotional powers are born from the intellectual powers. They're called the mothers and the children, or the parents and the children. Then we spoke about the garments, which are our thought, speech, and action. And we spoke about how when the 10 powers of the godly soul enclose themselves within these 3 garments with which, or functions with which a person interacts with the world, that is how a mitzvah is done, right? And we branched off on that note. We spent a chapter and a half talking about how a mitzvah is done and how Torah study is done, how we use our thought or our speech to study Torah, and we elaborated upon that quite a bit in last week's lesson. And in this week's lesson, the Alter Rebbe begins with a quote from G-dly, right? So in your Tanya, we are on page 83, and in your handout, we are on chapter 6, titled Your Darker Side. And the first verse that the Alter Rebbe opens up the chapter with, V'hinei, and behold. Tanya isn't written like your average English book, right? But it says Zeh. So there would be, in an English book, there would be quotes here. Zeh leumat zeh asa Elokim. God has made one opposite the other. This is a quote from G-dly. I always hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. In Hebrew, it's Kohelet. Nobody else is sure how to pronounce it either way, right? So not a big deal if I mispronounce it. And this is a famous verse, and this is the source for the fact that anything that there is on the godly side, there is too on the dark side. And we'll talk in a moment why we call it dark, right? I actually just saw an interesting, I didn't watch it. When you're flipping through Facebook and different videos are coming up, and a video from Prager University popped up, and it's called, I forgot what it's called, but basically in it he discusses why we call holiness or goodness light and darkness evil. And the point that he's making over there is that no, maybe we should be calling evil or bad by some other name, like by a bright light instead. I forgot, I didn't watch the video, but that was the gist of it. So we'll get to that in a moment, why we call evil dark and holiness light. But the pasuk, the verse says, V'hinei zeh leumat zeh asa Elokim. God created one opposite the other. Everything that there is in holiness, there is too in unholiness. Everything that there is on the light side, there is on the dark side. Everything that there is in terms of a mitzvah, there is on the opposite as well. Before we elaborate upon what that means, which we're going to do in a moment, which is probably the crux of our chapter, of our discussion today is going to be on that, but before we do so, Hey Elise, how are you? So before we do so, just to explain why, no, Ruth is sitting right here, so you can, right here? Yeah, sure, perfect. So before we do elaborate upon how that works, let's just talk very briefly about why, and that's because God created a world in which every single Jew, at every single moment, has a choice. And there's lots of discussion in this in Chassidus about whether that choice is real, whether it's just an illusion, philosophically, whether it's real or you think you have a choice. How can God know what we're going to do in the future, etc. Lots of good philosophical questions on this topic. That's not the topic of today's lesson. But in order for there to be proper freedom of choice, in order for there to be proper decisions that we can actually make by approaching a scenario, we have to be able to do A or do B. We have to either be able to choose the right thing or the wrong thing. The wrong thing must exist. In other words, every scenario must have that wrong thing. This is most clearly elaborated upon in the pasuk in the Torah, actually, in the 5 books of Moses. I think it's in Parshas Re'eh, where God says, Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom. See that I have put before you today et hachayim vet hatov vet hamavet vet hara. I have put the good, which is life, which will lead you to life, and the bad, which will lead you to the opposite. The Torah actually calls it death. Very straightforward. Uvacharta b'chayim, and you shall choose life.
Amen.
That's a pasuk in the Torah. And in order to back up that concept, it's important to understand that any choice that we are going to have, that we can do holy, right? Sometimes we and by the way, at different moments in our lives, and in terms of experience, we find this all the time. We find sometimes when we see something, we're like, oh my gosh, can you imagine how this is such a great holy level? You see somebody and they're such a tzaddik and they're such a great person, right? And in that moment, we're so like in awe of how great or how amazing or how kind this person is, we neglect to think about the opposite, right? Or right, and we think that, wow, it's so amazing that there's such good things in this world, right? And sometimes we see the opposite. We see such tragedy in the world, right? And again, we're so in awe by how is it possible? Usually we don't use the word awe. We usually use the word like shock or or fear, right? How can there be such evil in the world? We're confronted by terrorism or something like that, right? Or tragedy, right? Where someone has a loved one that passes, or a child that passes away. How can this be? Heaven forfend, right? Or a tornado wreaks havoc on a whole city and thousands of people die, right? The answer is that never get caught up just in that. Obviously, yes, get caught up in that moment. It's good to be present. It's good to, little plug for the communication course that's happening now about being present, and the G-dly course that's happening by my colleague Rabbi Shalom Stiefel, Communication, Its Art and Soul. But back to our topic at hand, it's important to understand anytime we see something, whether it's great or whether it's even the most minute act of holiness, it will always have its counterpart, quid pro quo, on the dark side. So zeh leumat zeh is best translated as quid pro quo. No matter, or in truth, I don't know if it's best translated as quid pro quo, but it's a good, the tit for tat. There will always be a reflection of what there is on the good side and the evil side. And the Alter Rebbe starts off with that basis, that foundation, and then leads on to explain to us, okay, so now let's explore the animal soul. Okay? Everybody with me here so far? Mm-hmm. Now the Alter Rebbe gets into details, right? So, first of all, I did want to talk briefly. So let's take that back for a second. Before the Alter Rebbe gets into details, I wanted to talk briefly about why sitra achara, which is the word that is used for the other side, actually means the other side. The Alter Rebbe never uses the word evil, never uses the word bad. It's just the other side. And why is that? That is because there is no such thing really as evil. There is no such, evil is not a real existence. What is evil? What is the sitra achra, or the other side that we speak of? What is the dark side? It is the absence of godliness. Why? Because this world is naturally godly. God created this world, and God not created in the past. God creates this world at every moment, and therefore godliness pulsates in creation. Right? In order for something to not be godly, it need do nothing more other than disassociate itself from godliness, and automatically it is evil. Automatically it is. So there is no such thing. The Alter Rebbe doesn't use a word such as evil or ra. Obviously he will use the words bad, ra, later, or Russia, or words like that are associated with the negative side. But what he means always is something that is unholy. And this, my friends, explains why we always call this side the darker side. What is darkness? Anybody? Is darkness an existence?
No.
Darkness is the absence of light. That is what darkness is. It's not a real existence. Light is a natural thing. Everywhere in the world there is light. There is light. This is bringing light. That's bringing light. Darkness is the absence of light. Whenever there is a moment where there is no light in that room, somehow you manage to seal the entrances. We built a structure that has walls and is completely light-proof. In that room, so gesund. In that room, there will be darkness. Not there will be darkness, there will be no light, which automatically we call darkness. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yet everything is from Hashem, and therefore that darkness is part of it.
Great point, great question. Essentially what you're asking is, one of the best philosophical questions ever posed, if God is good, how can evil exist? Right? Is evil supported by something? Is energy being given to evil from some other force other than God? According to Jewish tradition, that would be heresy. Mm-hmm. Right? We believe in only one God. So where is this other force coming from, right? Meaning, again, if you believe in pluralistic, religions, so then they're like, no problem. There are two gods. They got into a fight at some point. There's one godly energy versus another godly energy, and that could explain holiness and unholiness. But if we believe that there's only one God, even if you say that after that the godliness gets enclosed, how can there ever be something that opposes the will of God, right? Very good question. We are going to address that in this lesson at the end of the lesson. You can see that in number 3, in section 3 of the lesson, right before the analogy. Right after the analogy. So if these actions are not receiving godly infusion, how do they exist? And we'll get to that when we get there. Okay. So therefore, unholiness, that's the word we'll use, in Hebrew is called sitra achra, which means the other side. In other words, the absence of kedusha, the absence of light. Now, we've used another word in the past. In chapter 2, we introduced it. It's called kalipa. Right? Kalipa means the shell. Everybody remember that, right? And we spoke about how that's because, right, it blocks over the essential or the core, right? It distracts us. So at the beginning of today's lesson, and we're going to throw a lot of information in today's lesson. I want to have it structured properly. So I'm just going to introduce you to this content, and we'll elaborate upon it later, all the way at the end in section 4. So there are two types of klipas. There are two types of shells. One of them is called klipas noga, otherwise known as the neutral klipa. That's where the power, let's say, for the internet comes, right? Internet is not an inherently good or evil thing, right? Internet can be used for good or evil. That's what we would call, in Hasidic terminology, klipas noga. That's where the power, by the way, to eat comes from, right? Because eating is neither holy or unholy. You can use the energy granted to you by the sustenance you will have from the food to either, heaven forbid, murder someone, or God willing to do beautiful things, to visit someone in a hospital, to give tzedakah, or to anything, right? That energy can be used in any way, right? To walk to shul, to keep Shabbos, or whatever it is that you're going to take that moment to, that energy to use it for.
To come to the class on Tanya.
To come to the class on Tanya, very good, thank you. So that is the klipas noga, right? Mm-hmm. The other 3 klipos, right? So that's the first one, the lowest version, the least evil, if you will, right? So, but by the way, and this is why it's so important that we had that introduction about it being unholy. Well, because klipas noga is also unholy, right? It's not godliness. It's not godliness. To eat is not godliness. When you take food and you eat it and you use it for the proper reasons, right? Welcome. And you actually use that and you uplift it and you actually serve God with that energy. You have now infused that with godly energy, which we'll get to later. Shalosh klipos atmeos, the 3 impure klipot, right? That's the actual translation of the words. Or in other words, the source of all evil in this world, that can never be used for good. Okay? So that's a brief introduction to these 2. And later on, we'll talk about them a little more. Now,
what's it word again? Klipa what?
Klipa means the shell. So you have klipas noga,
right? And
then you have shalosh, which means 3. Kalipos, which is klipa in plural. Hatimeos, which means the impure ones. Right? So tameh, anybody ever heard the word tameh? Mm-hmm. So hatimeos means the impure ones. Okay. So now the Alter Rebbe has introduced us to the concept of why evil exists in the world, right? Why the other side exists in the world, right? By the way, don't let the fact that we're in the middle of a class and distract you. You just got the answer to one of the deepest philosophical questions of all time, right? Why does evil need to exist in the world? Everybody walks in, why do bad things happen? Okay, well, it's not the answer to why do bad things happen to good people, but it touches on that, right? Why does evil exist in this world? Why couldn't God just create the world and make it amazingly good? Right? The answer, see, I have put before you today. God says, I want you to make a choice. I want to give you, Yosef Ilan, right? Daniel, I want to give every single one of you the choice. Put it in your hands to do good or evil, to do good or the opposite, right? To make it an equal choice. Right? And if that wouldn't exist, then the whole freedom of choice goes out the window. If good would somehow have much more energy from godliness than evil would, wouldn't it be simple to choose good? Right? No, this poor pitiful, I don't know, whatever it is, cheeseburger. You would never eat it, right? If it didn't have the same godly energy in it that was sustaining it. It needs to have that godly energy. And therefore it's created. Okay. Now we're going to talk later about how that comes from such a holy source, right? If If it needs to have energy, if it needs to exist, then where does that come from? Okay, fine. Now the Alter Rebbe introduced why evil exists in this world, and he tells us that everything in this world works quid pro quo, that anything, for the past 4 chapters we've elaborated about lots of different details, that there were in holiness, right? We were all excited, we're like, wow, look at me, I have such power in me, right? I have these 7 emotional godly powers, and these 3 intellectual godly powers, I have the godly thoughts, godly speech, godly action, that's what I'm made of. So the answer is, the Alter Rebbe in this chapter comes to introduce us to the fact that you also have a darker side, right? And that darker side works in the same manner that the godly side works. So there are going to be 10 powers, and those 10 powers are going to be split. There are going to be 7 emotional unholy powers, and 7 intellectual unholy powers, which give birth to those 3 intellectual unholy powers, which give birth to those 7 emotional unholy powers. Right? That's what we call the Nefesh HaBahamit. Right? So while till now it was sort of this enigma, the animal soul, what is that? What is the animal soul? The animal soul is just like the godly soul. Right? First we had this enigma of the godly soul. We broke it down. We spoke about the fact that the godly soul is what? It's intellect, it's emotion, it's all these powers that pulsate our lives. Right? And then we can use them and enclose them in our thought, speech, and action. The unholy soul, the animal soul, the Nefesh HaBahamit is exactly the same thing. What is it? Break it down. 10 powers that can then be enclosed in the 3 garments of thought, speech, and action. Right? This is why, in our experience, we notice this most in children. Right? So we spoke about the fact that the Nefesh HaShenit, why is the godly soul called the second soul? The Nefesh HaShenit, and that's because chronologically, the way our bodies develop is that God gives us the natural soul first, the animal soul, and then at our bar mitzvah or our bat mitzvah, that's when the godly soul is injected. Right? That's why it's called the second soul. And that's also why we see, and that's why we spoke, in the first lesson, we spoke very briefly about the fact that lots of times we see children, and they seem very, very self-centered, right? So the children are all self-centered. I don't care you're on the phone. Right now, I need you to get me this off the shelf. Right? How many times does that happen? Never, right?
Just wait.
Very good. That's why they seem very self-centered, right? But similarly, that's also, by the way, why you see in children that it's a developing process, right? Why? Because if their animal soul is what's powering them, right? That animal soul is born, and the intellect is very, very minimal, right? And that intellect develops over time until they become bar mitzvah, right? If their intellect is developing, obviously so are their emotions, right? So that means when a child is 4 years old, why does a child throw a temper tantrum when you don't want to give him the sweet cereal that he wants? That's because his intellect can't hold that much, so automatically his emotions are very contracted, very, very, limited or what?
Raw,
very, exactly. I want the sweet cereal, you're not giving it to me, I'm upset. There's no right, and that's why when they get upset so easily, and from such silly things, right? You're not getting the sweet cereal, but I'm telling you the reason you're not getting it is because we're going to a party and you're going to be getting so much more. Why are you getting so? No, it doesn't make a difference. Right now, on a very simple, literal level, in front of my face, I'm not getting what I want. I'm upset. Why? Because everything is undeveloped. So the animal soul is born with the human being, but not fully developed. It slowly develops over time until by the time the child turns 13 years old, right? Which is no coincidence that's when puberty hits, or in emotional and intellectual language, that's when maturity hits. All of a sudden, they get what's called gadlus hameichin, right? Kapnus hameichin means they're undeveloped in intellect, small in English, intellect. And that grows until it's finally gadlus hameichin, which means mature intellect. And that mature intellect obviously gives birth to mature emotions, right? And that is when, for the first time, God can inject one with a godly soul. Why? Because for the first time, the playing field is even. Right? And that's also why we're not responsible for our actions until we turn 13 or 12. Right? So that's a little bit about the history of them. So the unholy soul, or the animalistic soul, or the natural soul, also contains 10 powers, 3 intellectual and 7 emotional. Everybody with me? Mm-hmm. All right. We move on to point number 2. Okay? And this touches on the fact that now that we understand that what is darkness? It's the absence of light. What is unholiness? The absence of holiness. What is the opposite of God? Ungodliness. So you don't need to do something specific in order for it not to be godly. anything that we do in this world is automatically either godly or not godly.
Yikes.
It's not as scary as it sounds. We're going to elaborate upon it in a moment. But before we get to that point, right? So how does that work, right? So we spoke about the fact that in just 2 chapters ago, we spoke about the garments, right? Thought, speech, action, and how the powers enclose themselves within the garments, and that's how we interact with the world, right? So are the garments holy?
No.
The garments are neither. Correct. The garments are neutral. The garments are just our thought, just our speech, just our action. But the moment that we take our 10 powers, whichever 10 powers those may be, whether they be holy or unholy, and we enclose them inside those garments of thought, speech, or action, now the thought, speech, or action becomes holy or unholy, reflecting what's inside of it. An analogy that just occurs on the top of my head right now, right, is a gun good or evil? Choose gun is a bad, okay. It just popped in my head right now. It's a bad example, especially based on the argument of the Republicans and Democrats, or the conservatives and the liberals, what exactly the definition of the Second Amendment is. Either way, the point is there are things that depending on whose hands they're in, a scalpel is a knife is a great example. It was a knife. I think everybody agrees, right? A knife in the hands of a terrorist, in the hands of a murderer, is the most evil thing there is in the world, right? A knife in the hands of a doctor, a scalpel, one of the most holy things that could be in the world. He's gonna heal someone. He's gonna remove a cancer from someone. How amazing is that? Right? It's one of the most holy. He's granting life. Literally, the same tool that is used to take away life, heaven forbid, is used to grant life. Right? Similarly here, the same tools which we are given, the same garments which we use, we do such a holy mitzvah with it. Right? You take your actions and you use this hand to give tzedakah to someone. What else can be done with this hand? Right? Heaven forbid. Right? Lots of things that are the opposite, that are unholy. Very good. Exactly. So our garments, the moment that they are enclosed with a power, another step takes place, which is the garments become holy or unholy. So now, based on what we were saying just earlier about what unholiness is, right? So how does that work? The moment that a person uses his garments, right? What are garments? Thought, speech, or action, right? Let's take action because that's the most literal and simple one to use, right? The moment that a person takes an action, right? He has an action that he can go like that, and he infuses that action with holiness. The next step that happens is that action gets infused with a godly energy. An element of godliness, which usually is removed from any action, infuses itself within that action. And then that action becomes godly. To talk about a mitzvah, right? This touches on what we spoke about last lesson, right? About Torah study and it being in our mind, and godliness, and right, and the godly thought and our thought, etc. The way they intertwine. The same thing happens with an action. The moment we do a holy action, that action itself becomes godly. Why? Because a godly energy comes and sort of infuses it or makes it holy, right? Now, who's doing that? Who's bringing down that godly energy? The Jew. Us. Why? Because we're the one who did that action. We could have chosen not to do that. And let's talk about that for a moment. What happens when a person takes his actions, that particular garment, or any one of the 3 garments, and chooses to do something which is unholy with it? Nothing. Just no godliness comes and infuses that action. But that action is automatically unholy. And I know that sounds scary. Pam before gave a gasp, right? About how, anything I do is we'll talk about it in just a moment. Right? So this, let's talk about it now. We're basically holding there already. Right? So
It would be so helpful if we will have a simple diagram or graph.
would help you?
Of course, 7, 4, negative, positive.
Visual learner.
Right. So Dan has asked before that we should bring the famous Kabbalistic drawing, which has the 9 and then the one on the bottom, the 3. Look, we'll bring it one class. One class will bring it.
Yeah,
It would help. It's true. We could put it on the screen. So the point that we're getting to now is the Alter Rebbe's sort of novel conclusion from this, which is that every action is either holy or unholy. There's no such thing as a neutral action. right? Which is the title of section 2, right? There are no spiritually neutral actions. So turn to the bottom of page 85.
We just said there are.
What did we say?
Neutral, non-neutral.
Neutral actions? No. We said that any action either gets infused with godliness or it doesn't get infused with godliness. And the moment that it's exactly, there's neutral klippa, which we'll get to in a moment. There's a klippa which is not necessarily evil and can be used for the good or for the bad. That's what we said. That's what power is food, right? But actions, there are no spiritually neutral actions. Anytime we have an action in front of us, the action that we're doing is either holy or unholy. Let's read it inside. I think it will clarify a lot. We're on page 85 on the bottom. An important paradigm shift, which emerges from the Tanya's doctrine of two souls, is that there is no such thing as a spiritually neutral activity. In Jewish law, we find three categories of behavior. Right? One, the religiously required, such as keeping the Shabbos and the giving of charity. Two, the religiously forbidden, such as eating pig or stealing. Right? And C, which is, I think, what you're curious about, ordinary acts which are neither religiously required nor forbidden, such as checking your email or buying clothes. Everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
According to the Tanya, however, it would be a mistake to conclude that this third category is spiritually neutral. Even an ordinary behavior either is godly infused or it's not godliness infused, right? Will either promote God consciousness or ego consciousness, depending on your attitude. There is no third option.
Open up Zushi emails or open up...
No, 1 second. No, it's not true, by the way, because we're talking about even the same email. Even the same email that you open can be opened with a godly... No. And now let's talk about why that is, right? Let's talk about why that is. There was a famous Talmud, a famous quote in the Talmud in the Gemara, which says that when that kli reikon machzik, it's a very very deep thought. A cup that's full cannot have anything in it. A cup that's empty can have something in it. Kli reikon machzik, a vessel that is empty holds something within it, can contain something, but a full vessel cannot. And God tells us these exact words. God tells us about a man who is too full of himself. God says, it's not an issue that I have an issue with ego. There's no space for me. Right? Me and him, we cannot reside in the same space. Ego and godliness, it's not they're at war with each other. It's just when someone is so full of himself, there is no space for godliness. Right? I'll pause to give another thought on this point, just because tonight is Tes Shvat, which is the 9th day of the month of Shvat, meaning tonight. Tomorrow is Tes Shvat, the 9th day of the month of Shvat. The following day is Yud Shvat, one of the greatest days on the Hasidic calendar.
Tomorrow.
Not tomorrow, the next day. Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow
night, Friday, in other words, will be Yud Shvat. Yud Shvat is the 10th day of the month of Shvat, and it's a very, very special day on the Hasidic calendar. And the reason is because two major events happened on the 10th day of the month of Shvat. In 1950, that is the day when the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, passed on from this world. And for a year, from 1950 until 1951, the Chabad movement was sort of in limbo, meaning Hasidim were, the previous Rebbe had two sons-in-law, both very, very great scholars. One of them, our Rebbe, then known as the Ramash, which is an acronym for his name, Rabbi Mendel Schneerson. And the other one was the Rashag, or Rabbi Shmuel Gerari. Rabbi Shmayo Gerari. And the Hasidim were clamoring sort of to try to get most of them for the Rebbe, that the Rebbe should accept the leadership of the Chabad movement. And it took a full year until the following year on Yud Shvat that the Rebbe officially accepted. I mean, it was sort of gradual. There were different sort of milestones, and those are like some of the smaller dates that people will celebrate. That the different milestones that happened along the way. Oh, the Rebbe took the first Yechidus, for instance. That the Rebbe, I remember my grandfather telling me that it was during that time that his father, he was my age then, in 1950, and his father lived in Sweden at the time, and he wanted to get a Canadian passport. He wasn't sure whether to do it or not, and this was something he would usually ask a Rebbe. And he sent in a letter before the previous Rebbe passed away. And my grandfather only received it, and so he brought it into the Rebbe. And when the Rebbe actually accepted his audience and accepted his letter, that was like a huge milestone, for him at least. like, oh, he's actually giving me advice, which is sort of accepting leadership on a certain level. But in Chassidus in general, in the Chassidic tradition in general, a Rebbe, what differentiates a Rebbe from any great Chassid or great rabbi or very, very big shliach, who has thousands of followers, for lack of a better term, right? The difference has always been saying Chassidus, teaching actual new Chassidus, right? So we sit here and we learn Chassidus. I'm teaching you the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, maybe with explanations by the Rebbe, right? But I'm not teaching you new Chassidus. To introduce new Chassidus is considered a godly act. In other words, you have to receive it from on high, from divine revelation, and then reveal it to the Chassidim. And that happened on Yud Shvat, on the 10th day of the month of Shvat, in 5711, 5711, or 1951. Now, this whole introduction is why, because based on this same concept that we were saying, right, about the fact that ego is the lack of the ability for God to exist, right? The Rebbe talks in that Maimer, that Hasidic discourse, which the Rebbe gave on that day, which was the formal acceptance, right? Many people say the Rebbe was Rebbe from beforehand, but the formal acceptance, at least in a revealed manner for everyone, that the Rebbe was this Hasidic discourse. And there's lots of things that happened in that discourse. The Rebbe, you could see there's a lot of, spiritual things going on. The Rebbe quoted every single one of his predecessors. The Rebbe gave us, during that Farbrengen, the Rebbe gave a statement. Right, the Rebbe, it's very interesting actually. You listen to it, this is not in the Maimer, this is not in the Chassidic discourse, but during that time, the Rebbe talks about the fact that in America, because the Rebbe was the first Rebbe to become Rebbe in America. The previous Rebbe was here the last 10 years of his life, but he came from Russia. The Rebbe says how in America the custom is that whenever you start something, you have a statement, right? Get and I started the Pasadena Jewish Academy, we had to put together a mission statement. Right? Everybody has a statement. And the Rebbe gave the statement for Chassidus in America, that it's built on three loves. The love of the love that a Jew has to another Jew, the love that a Jew has towards God, and the love that a Jew has for the Torah. Whatever, now is neither the time or the place. But in this Hasidic discourse, one of the things that the Rebbe talks about is this concept. The fact that the world is created, and the point of the world being created, right? So Hasidus gets all nitty gritty all along the way, right? The whole process of creation. It starts with just a little bit of ego existing, right? Not even a formed ego, not even human beings yet, etc. With the four realms, you heard of this four spiritual realms from godliness itself, and as it slowly becomes more physical, right, until this world can be created. And in that Maimer, the Rebbe talks about the fact that the reason that the world was created, the whole purpose of the world's creation was here. This world was our world. Okay, how do you know? How do you know that it's not from one of the higher spiritual realms, right? So the reason is because you see that it didn't stop until it came here, right? That's the logical conclusion, because this is the furthest and lowest realm. So obviously this was the point. God was trying to create, I'll put trying in air quotes, a physical world. And when God actually created the physical world, God stopped. Well, not stopped, but recreates the world always. But this is the lowest. It doesn't get more physical than us, people. Now, then the Rebbe explains that what does it mean that we're the lowest? Right? What makes us more physical than angels, for instance? Right? Because angels hang out in one of the higher spiritual realms. What makes us more physical? The fact that we believe, or we can choose to believe, that mitziusoi me'atzmusoi, that our existence is from ourselves, that we created ourselves. In English, we call this, I don't know if evolution, but similarly, right? The fact that we can actually believe in evolution, which if you think about it, if godliness is real and all over the world, right? A different question whether evolution and godliness and God creating the world as a whole, whether they're actually contradictions, but assuming they are, right? How is it possible to be an atheist in this world, right? If godliness is everywhere, if godliness is rampant, if godliness is this world, then how can you be an atheist, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the point.
Atheism is also religion.
That's a very, very side point. Well, we can have that discussion at a different time. But the point here is that God wanted to create a world where you have that choice, where you could choose not to believe in God, where godliness is not natural. Where godliness, if you dig beneath the surface and you actually choose to, then you'll see that godliness is the source for the creation, but then you can choose to convince yourself that it's not. Right? Now you tell me. If that's not the ultimate ego, what is? The ultimate ego is something was around before me. Something created me. I am and all. Even if it doesn't come out in hitting someone else, right? Most times ego comes out in selfish behavior. Even if it doesn't come out in selfish behavior. Sometimes it's just an intellectual concept. right? I am and all. Metziuto me'atzmuto. I am from myself. I have created myself. Right? Paro is the ultimate example. Is right? Paro says Paro is famously quoted as saying, "The Nile is mine and I have created it." Right? And in another version, it's the Nile is mine and I have created myself.
Wow.
Right? If that's not the ultimate ego, what is? Why can't God handle ego? It's not that He can't handle ego. You're leaving no space. In your existence, in your reality, there is no space for godliness. And that, my friends, is the root of all evil. As much as it sounds like so petty, like, okay, someone will fool myself. What's the big deal? My friends, the opposite of that, which is a lifelong effort, is called bittul, nullification, self-nullification. And getting ourselves out of the way is the only way, is the way that we accept godliness into our lives. Why? Because if we can get ourselves out of the way even 1%, even 0.0000001%, then in that little percentage, what happens? Automatically, what do we say? There's no neutral zone. There's no space where there's no ego and there's no godliness. No, if there's no you, then godliness enters. That's how it works. So now back to Pam's question, right? It's very scary. It's very scary. Everything I do is either godly or ungodly, holy or unholy. Yes. Everything that we do in this world is driven by one of two things. Ego or lack of ego. And lack of ego automatically introduces godliness. Right? So another way of saying that same statement is, everything in this world is driven by one of two things. Godliness or lack of godliness. And if there's lack of godliness, what's driving it? Ego. Right? I think at the end of last week's lesson, after the recording, we spoke about, one second, I'll take questions just a second. We are reaching the end of the point here. I think at the end of last week's, we spoke about Maslow's pyramid of needs, right? Was that right? I think it was after last week's class, we spoke about the pyramid of needs.
No.
Maslow's pyramid of needs.
We talked about before.
Food and shelter before the class. Not everybody was here, right? But everybody's heard of it?
I was here. We talked about
right?
it together.
What is the point? What is the ultimate on his thing? What's the ultimate? Right? Everything. What? Self-actualization. No, but what's the next step? Even more than self-actualization is something beyond myself.
It's got a sense of belonging.
So sense of belonging is down there, under there. Okay, whatever. Now it's not a discussion on Maslow's pyramid of needs, but the point is that we have, right? There's food, shelter, our lives. Everything we do in our lives is part of what? That's part of ego, usually, right? But then we can choose instead of focusing on our ego, to take all those things and make them all godliness. Why do I exist in this world? For God, right? What's the ultimate devotion to God? When Yitzchak is on the Akedah. Not even that, actually, right? It's Yitzchak that's the ultimate, not Avraham, right? Not Avraham who's going to sacrifice his son. But Yitzchak says, I'm willing to give up my life for God, right? If that's not the extreme opposite of ego, what is? Right? I'm willing to actually give up my existence. Not only I don't believe my existence is for myself, not only I'm willing to admit that maybe a God created me, not only I'm willing to actually do things for that God, not only am I willing to allow others, in other words, godliness, right? Because when we care for others, we believe that there's something higher than us, and that's what's making us care for others. Not only am I willing to do all that to allow them into my lives, if necessary, right? Not the first step that I take. I don't look to give up my life, right? But my devotion to that cause is so great, my devotion to godliness is so great, that if my ego ceases to exist completely, I'm fine with that. Because my ego is completely gone. No, I'm not saying it's a level that anyone in this room is holding at, right? Maybe there is, but not me. But that's why that's the ultimate. That's why we talk about complete devotion to godliness, right? I mean, on another level, this is a discussion, I said this, about whether actually giving up one's life is the ultimate of what God wants or not, right? Because you could say also that there's another way of doing that, right? You could give up your life while still remaining alive. Anybody with me on that? Mm-hmm. Right? You can give up your life. In other words, you can say a true tzaddik, right? The Rebbe didn't have a personal life. There was no anything the Rebbe did in his life was for other people. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's in a sense even higher than giving up your life. When you give up your life, you can't even do anything anymore for God. Right? But when your entire life is dictated by godly you're just a conduit. Whatever God wants in this world, I'll do that. That's at a higher level than giving up your life, right? That's a different discussion about what's better, giving up your life or giving your life. Okay, so that's we're at the end now of number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let me just make sure we did all the points here in the right. So bullet point number 3 is what we read inside. Bullet point number 4 is when we spoke about how every thought, speech, and action under the sun is obviously driven by either the godly or animal soul. Therefore, every one of them is either holy or unholy. And how is an action holy? Because there's godly infusion, right? And how is there godly infusion? I mean, why does godly infusion happen when we do a holy action? Because there's a lack of ego. Because bittul. Because we've nullified ourselves. We've removed our existence from even an iota of our lives. Oh, and this is a very important line. The Alter Rebbe makes sure to make it clear that this ability, right, is available to every single person. It doesn't make a difference if you're the biggest tzaddik or the biggest rasha, you're the holiest person or the most unholy person in the world. That choice at every moment to allow God into your life or not allow God into your life, to do the good, to do good or to do evil, is always available to us, and we can do it. And a great example of this is sometimes when we look at children, we see their innocence, or a better example is angels. Right? Angels, what are angels? Angels don't have an ego. Right? And when they don't have an ego, what are they? Just expressions of godliness. Right? So if we can be even on one iota, angelic meaning that we allow godliness to our lives, godliness to flow through our lives, then we've accomplished the reason for existence in that one point. We call the meaning of life, right? Except that we've done it much more powerfully than angels have done it, right? Because angels never had the choice. Angels were never faced with that challenge of choosing which way, right? Angels only have one expression, and that they only have one existence, which is godliness. Okay, fine. You wanted to ask something, right?
I had just a slight confusion. Because everything we do is either holy or unholy. I remember in the book of Garden of Emunah, I was reading that even when we do something unholy or something bad, even ultimately because of the greatness of God, somehow God's hand was in it and we did it for the ultimate good.
Okay, so that's an interesting point, right?
It's confused, a little bit confusing. Maybe they're not related.
Well, first of all, when we do something unholy, there's no question that it's against God's desire. It's not what God wants, right?
God can use it.
What I've never. Which book did you say it was in?
Garden of Emunah.
Emunah.
Is that a translation of a Hebrew?
Shulchan, whatever.
Yeah.
Aruch?
Yeah, Aruch.
Oh, Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah.
No, not Shulchan Aruch.
No.
So I'm not familiar with which book particularly this is. Now, okay, very good. I'm not going to take away from that what that book says, because we're going to get to this. Actually, it's the next point on our list here that we're going to get to, which is there's no way we could say that something exists in this world which is not God's desire, right? This touches back on our philosophical question as to why, not why, but how can evil exist in this world?
Or anything.
Whatever enemy meant.
Well, anything you could say because God wants them to be godly. Right? Why we exist in this world, we don't have an issue with that. We know exactly why, right? We're okay with it.
Yeah.
No, on a serious note.
Shalom Arush.
Shalom Arush.
Shalom
Okay. So this touches on that kind, meaning because, definitely on a certain level, even when we do something unholy, that's also part of God's desire, right? Obviously, God wanted us to do that on a certain level, right?
So then we can repent and do holy.
Right. I don't want to go down this path because it's not slippery. It's a long path that there's a lot to discuss about, which is basically what Margarita just touched on, which is that what should be our approach to when we did something wrong. We'll touch on it very, very briefly, right? Why?
So we can
Definitely our approach should be teshuvah, right? But does teshuvah mean that we spend our entire lives regretting what we did and our entire lives living in the past and right? Psychologists would have a lot to say for us, right? If somebody lives in their bad actions, let's say they did something wrong once when they were 20 years old and they were young and foolish, right? And in the rest of their lives they live with that, right?
They carrying it.
So Chassidus talks about the fact that like Marguerite said, that the whole point of it is the ultimate level is to reach, and we're going to talk about teshuvah later on in Tanya, so that's why I don't want to talk about it too much at length. But that the point of that is, the ultimate level is that we should view that as an opportunity. That negative, the fact that we have that negative in us, is an opportunity to transform that negative into a positive. In other words, to do teshuvah, and the ultimate level of teshuvah, which is a donot nasin lo kezachiot, which means that his transgressions actually become good things in his life, he transforms those negative things from being, he's done so much teshuvah in the action, and that finally reaches the level of makom shebalei teshuvah umdin, in a place where repenters or balei teshuvah, those who do teshuvah, right, stand. Ein tzadikim gemurin yicholim la'amod. Even the highest tzaddik, who's never done anything wrong in his life, can never reach that level. In other words, a Baal Teshuvah, in terms of levels, is higher. Someone who does Teshuvah, someone who repents from his ways, and from then on doesn't do any transgressions, but he has transgressions in his history, is on a higher level than a tzaddik. And we'll talk later about why that is. Right?
We've read it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there is hope for us, exactly. There's hope for us.
So is that because...
One second. Before we get to new things, I just want to touch on what I've mentioned. That could be that's what they're talking about there, that even in the unholy, there's a desire of God because he wants the unholiness to be transformed into holiness, which is a whole other thing, right? But which maybe sometimes the way we view it after the fact, right? But on a simple level, let's talk about beforehand. If walking down a typical example, you're walking down the supermarket aisle and you have the opportunity, right? The video cameras are not working and nobody's watching, whatever. Not kosher. I was going to say steal or not steal, right? You have the opportunity to you have the item in your hand, you're standing in line and you notice that there's only one cashier in the whole store, there's only one staff in the whole store, and you have the opportunity to walk out and nobody will know the difference, right? You choose to stay in the store and pay for it, right? You've just done the ultimate level, which is removed your selfish self, your unholy self says, why should I allow godliness in? Why should I allow any moral code in? I want to do what I want to do. I don't have the money to pay for this right now, or I'd rather use the money for something else, right? So I want to walk out with this. And you choose not to do that. What you've done is you've allowed godliness to your life. In other words, you've made your actions holy. So definitely when we're faced with that approach, when we're faced with that choice, on that level, there's no room for there's godliness in the unholy. You know what? I'm going to steal now, like that I could do tshuva later. By the way, we're going to talk about that later in Tanya. Someone who says echta va'ashuv. Someone who says I will sin and then I will repent later. Whether that's a good path to follow or not. You don't advise?
I do that every day.
You do every day.
That's when it comes to short.
Yes, Pat. So that's I think I touched on what you said. I might not have answered it completely.
Yes,
but
we'll definitely guided me how to listen at this moment.
Okay, so we'll talk about it a little bit more as time goes on. Yes, Pam.
So is this possible? I have two things to say. One, is this possibly explained by the fact that God says there's opposites, and when we transgress, the lower we transgress is the potential for as high as it can be transformed even higher.
100%. Again, these are we're starting to get into
like
side topics.
Ball.
Right, exactly. We're starting to get to side topics, which I'm going to choose not to dwell on it, but it's a good point, and it touches on our conversation. So I'll dwell on it briefly. In Chassidus, this concept is referred to as kala gavoa gavoa v'yoter nofel l'mata mata yoter. It's actually a physics. It's a physics concept. The higher something is, the lower it will fall. Right. So if you have a wall. If you have a wall, and the wall is made up of 10 bricks, let's say, 10 bricks high, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? The one that's on the lowest level, when it falls, where does it fall?
Close by.
One brick down, right? The higher something is, the lower it will fall, right? That one will go much lower, not just from the top till where the first brick is, but if there's more space, it'll go even further than that, right? So think of like a ball, right, that moves. If you have a ball attached to a string when we were kids, I don't know why this just popped into my head, but it did, and I think it's a great example. So just in physics, you know those balls that you used to wrap the thing around your wrist, and you throw the bouncing ball? Mm-hmm. By the way, some people are like, yeah, I remember that from my childhood. Some people are like, I see my sons have that. Yeah. So when you throw it, right, it bounces equally in the other direction, right? So now think about the string. The part of the string that's right here, right, it goes all the way till here, it stretches, and then it goes all the way back till here. The part of the string that's right near the ball, or the ball itself, goes all the way halfway across the room, gets all the way halfway that way, right? So that exists in levels of holiness as well, or levels of kedusha as well. The higher something is, the lower it will fall, and therefore the higher it can reach, which is the main point that we're making here. That the higher it can reach, because it's so low, it means it has such a high source, and we can reach so much higher.
Excellent. And then second is an example of how to turn an ordinary neutral thing
something that's powered by klipas noga, an action.
Yeah. An
action is never ordinary. Every action is either godly or ungodly, depending on what's powering it. Are the 10 powers of the godly soul powering it? In other words, lack of ego. then it's a holy action. Are the 10 powers of the animal soul, in other words, our ego, is that what's powering it? So then there's no space for God, there's no godliness in it. And that action is unholy.
So if we're going to buy clothes, it's better to buy clothes in anticipation of wearing something new on Shabbos.
It's not just that. It's not just that. Are you buying clothing and those clothing are going to help you serve God? Whatever way, right? And we all know that.
Vanity
Everything we've done. What?
For vanity or
No,
something.
even for vanity. Is it for vanity, like she said, in order to honor Shabbos? Right? All of these things can be either for the good or for the bad. Unless it's an Avera. If it's something against God's will, right? To eat pig is an action that cannot be holy. Doesn't have that ability. Okay, Dan.
Is there any connection of this with the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov?
100%. The Yetzer Hara, or what we call the evil inclination, is a desire that we have, right? That desire, analyzed more properly, stems from the animalistic soul. And that desire is those 10 powers in effect, right? The 3 intellectual powers, giving birth to an emotion, which then gives birth to a desire, right? What we haven't talked about yet, and we're not going to talk about it, definitely not in this session, this 8-week session of Tanya, is where desire and pleasure come into play here, right? They're not part of the 10 powers. Desire is not one of the 10 powers. To want something, we haven't spoken about. That's a different level, and we'll talk about it.
Can you name some of the dark?
The 10 powers?
Yeah.
They have the same names. Chachma, Bina, Dat are the intellectual ones.
Okay.
Those same, there's Chachma, Bina, Dat of the Nefesh Elokit, of the godly soul, and there's Chachma, Bina, Dat of the animalistic soul. I'm glad you asked. I didn't realize that wasn't clear. I apologize. Okay. All right. We're ready to move on. So we move.
Sorry, one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm
Sorry.
a little confused with the klipas,
Noga.
the shells, and the garments. They kind of sound a little bit similar, but they're different things. Can you?
Not at all. The 3 garments are just functions that we have in our life, right? We use the term garment because that's a garment is something that we use to interact with the world, right? But if the word garment is confusing you, take it away. Thought, speech, and action. Those are the 3 garments.
And the klipas?
Klipa is a force. Force for
Shell.
well, that's the literal translation of it, means shell. But klipa is the unholy source of things, right? And we're going to talk about what the source of klipa is soon, right? But klipa is an unholy source for something. Something is either powered, right? So we said bottles of water are powered by. You know what? We're going to talk more.
Klipas are unholy?
What?
Klipas are unholy.
Yes.
Klipas that are holy and not holy.
No, klipas are only unholy. Klipas are ungodly.
Ungodly.
Well, one second. Let's leave the discussion about klipas for a moment. In number 4, in section 4, we're going to talk about the klipas, and that's the way we're going to end off our conversation. Yes.
Neutral or unholy?
Correct.
Not all unholy.
Right. We'll talk about it in number 4. First, we have this pressing question, right? How does evil exist? Right? So first of all, we spoke about how an action becomes unholy, right? If it's driven by your ego, so because there's no space for God, godliness cannot infuse it. Right? Godly energy cannot infuse that action, that thought, speech, or action. Right? So here's the big question. So if these actions are not receiving godly infusion, how do they exist? Right? So I thought nothing exists in this world, in this world besides for God. So it's a little bit of a trick question because they do come from God. They come from God through a certain filter, which is called Bechinas Acharayim. Okay? Bechinas Acharayim, hope we'll have enough time to talk about all these things at length. Bechinas Acharayim means as one who had Kman Shadar Basar Kaspe in Aramaic, as one who hands something off to another behind his back. Right? So I guess in this world you have it due to social norms, right? In some instances we give somebody there's the act of giving, right? The act of giving can be, I can give Dan something, right? I'd love to give Dan something. We're close, we're friends. I'd love to give it to him. I can give something to my wife. It's a whole other level of giving, right? I would give her anything, right? Now, then I can give something to my biggest enemy, right? For whatever reason, I have to give him something. We're talking about something that I'm actually giving, not give him, I don't know, give him hell or something. And sometimes even if we're forced to give something, we'll give it, but we give it sort of with a
grudge.
like a grudge, or like a begrudgingly is a good word, very good. So in the Talmud it talks about how giving someone something behind your back. You won't even look at them. Here, take it. Why? Because you so don't want to give it to them that's where it comes from. Okay, and that's what we call bechinas acharayim, which is acharayim means from behind. So kalipa, right? This is where you may have heard of kalipa sucking off of godly energy, right? Unholiness. Where do they get their source from? Their source has to come from godliness, but it comes on the shoulder basakaspa, like someone who throws it over his shoulder at them. Right? Why does it exist? We spoke about it already. It has to exist. Right? But does God want it to exist? Yes, God does want it to exist, right? Because He wants us to have that choice. But does God want it to exist the same way He wants holiness to exist? No. Holiness He gives, like I give something to my best friend, like I give something to my dear spouse, etc. Right? Right? Unholiness He gives, like you give it to your biggest enemy. Like, right? And this, by the way, shows us a little bit of the unlimitedness of godliness. Right? The godly light or godly energy, right? We always talk about godly energy and how low it can go, that it can even reach this physical world. Right? Look at how low it can go. It can go so low that even ego, even unholiness, even kalipa gets its source from holiness. Right? Now, when you examine the two side by side, right? Godliness itself in its purest form, unlimited form, and klipa or unholiness or something, right? They look like they almost can't coexist, but yet this one comes from that one. Okay, so that's the source of it. And now let's take a moment to talk. I know a lot of questions about the difference between the klipos. Okay, so the shalosh klipos atmeos, or the three impure klipos, are the source of pure evil. All averot, all transgressions, come from the root of all evil. In other words, from shalosh klipot atmeot. There is no way to uplift them. There is no way to elevate them. That's how I wrote it here in the handout. But more accurately said, bear with me here for a moment, guys. More accurately said, the way to uplift, the way to elevate, the way to refine, the way to make godly the shalosh klipot atmeot is by sticking away from them. Right? So, the act of rape, the act of murder, right? Not the actual act. The ability to murder, let's say, right, or the scenario to murder, comes from shalosh klipos hatmeos. You can't say, I'm going to murder this person, but it's going to be, I'm going to uplift it for godliness. I'm going to eat pig, which God doesn't want me to do. It's an aveira. It's clearly a transgression, transgressing God's will. But that I'm going to use that energy from the pig that I eat to serve God. Doesn't work that way. They are, we're called, locked in these shalosh klipos atmeos, in these three impure sources of evil, and the way to uplift them is by not doing them.
Is there any time when that is?
1 second. The Talmud talks about when Mashiach comes, the Yetzer Hara, right? You spoke of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, right? Is going to come to the Jews who listen to him and say, "Why did you listen to me?" They say, "What do you mean, why did I listen to you? You wanted me to do it." And he's going to say, "Yeah, but I was just doing my job. I was supposed to be here to try to get you to do the wrong thing, but you're listening to me." Then once the game is over.
The Yetzer Hara is supposed to have a good aspect, because if without it nobody does anything. If we're complacent and comfortable.
The Yetzer Hara is an evil inclination, is the desire to do evil.
Yeah, but there's a teaching that I think in the Talmud saying, without the Yetzer Hara you don't accomplish anything.
I think that depends on what. I'm not sure that's necessarily true.
I'll find it and send it to you.
Don't be devil's advocate.
Are you referring? 1 second. Are you referring to the? One second. We'll talk about it right after the class.
I'll check it
Okay,
out.
so that's shalosh klipos atmeos. So the action of eating pig, right? The ability to eat pig, that ability comes from the shalosh klipos atmeos, and it's not something that's refinable. Klipas noga, the fourth one, is that neutral one that we talk about. Right now, it's not an action. Klipas noga is a source for an action, right? So when we do something like checking our emails, that is, or let's take eating. Eating is a very good example. Right? When we eat, that comes from klipas noga. It's driven. The ability to eat comes from klipas noga. That is completely neutral until we do it. Right? So the ability to do it comes from Klippas Noga. But when we actually do it, this is the point you were struggling with before. When we actually do it, it's either godly or ungodly. Once you've done an action already, it's either God infused or not God infused. It's either driven by ego or not driven by ego. Because you did it a certain way. Right? Once you use the internet and you create a website that people can go on to do all sorts of terrible things, it's too late. That's already after the action. The internet comes from Klippas Noga. The next step, what you do with the internet, is your actual action. Your action is either holy or unholy. There's no in between.
So then the Klippas can have the holy.
Not holiness. Klippas Noga can be uplifted to holiness, but Klippas Noga itself is neutral. The source of neutral. So let's talk about it this way, right? Yeah. Kedusha, holiness, is the source of holy actions. Things that when you do them, they're automatically holy. And when you study Torah, it's automatically holy. Right? When you put on tefillin, it's automatically holy. Right? Mm-hmm. Those things, their source is in Kedusha. The source of tefillin is in holiness. Right? When you do an Aveira, the opposite of a mitzvah, transgression, the source of it is from the three impure klipot. Everything else, right? Look in the middle of section 2 by the bullet points, right? We said there's mitzvahs, giving tzedakah, keeping Shabbos, etc. Right? Those, there are sources from Kedusha, from holiness. Transgressions, eating pig, stealing, etc. Those, their source is from Shalosh Klipos Atmeos. You can't uplift those actions. Right? The way to uplift them is by not doing them. Number 3 is what we're talking about, is Klippas Noga, the neutral. The neutral, checking your email, buying clothes, eating, can be either when we do the action or when we speak the words. Words is another great example. What's the source of words? Right? The source of words is from Klippas Noga. Words are neither holy or unholy, but the moment that the words come out of our mouths and we've actually spoken them already, they're either holy or unholy. Either they were ego-driven and we said them because we were angry or because we were, whatever it is, or they were godly. Whether they were super godly like they were words of davening or words of Torah, or even if they were godly because they brought about shalom bayis, peace between a man and his wife. So telling your wife that you love her, that's godly words. Again, depending on what's driving it. But assuming that godliness is driving it, automatically that action becomes godly. But once that action, those words or that thought happened already, it's either holy or unholy. Because it's either driven by godliness or lack of ego, or driven by ego or lack of godliness.
What about when the motivation is godly but the outcome is unexpectedly bad?
Like?
That's a great question.
Well,
it's a great question. Sometimes we have good intentions. Right? Sometimes we have great intentions. I don't know, we moved our car from one parking spot to another parking spot because we wanted to leave that parking spot open for someone who wanted it and really didn't want the other parking spot. You don't always know what's going on in somebody else's mind, right? That's a great question. I would have to look into that. No, seriously.
Thank you.
I'm tempted to think that it's probably that the answer is probably that it depends on your motivation, because it's the way you did the action. It's not the result that happened as a result of that. It's not your fault. Assuming that it's true that you didn't know how your action would play out.
Motivation is best.
Because generally,
right. The Torah tells us. There are conflicting statements. The reason I'm saying that it's something I have to look into because there are conflicting statements in the Talmud about it. The Talmud tells us machshava tova HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfa l'maaseh, that when a person has good intentions, God automatically connects it to actions. That his actions should be good. Right. But then the Talmud also tells us that ha'maaseh hu ha'ikar, that action is king. Action is paramount. Good intentions don't help. It's about how the action actually plays out that works, right? So does Judaism believe that the road to hell is paved with good intentions? I don't know. That's a good question. But just to end off this point, right? So that's the difference between shalosh klipos atmeos. I'll definitely look into that for you. So that's the difference between shalosh klipos atmeos, or the 3 impure klipot, or klipas noga, the 1 neutral one. Right? Now, remember, all of this we're talking about in the unholy section, right? And the reason, Arnold, Yosefina, this is what you're struggling with. I just want to make sure you understand this point. The reason we call this the unholy section is because it's not godly. The source of these things is not godliness. Even if some of them, their source is neutral, their source is definitely not godliness. Kedusha, Holiness includes everything which its source is godliness. Right now, in these 4 klipos, one of them is neutral. Everything that comes from it is neutral, and it depends how you translate that. And the other 3 are naturally evil, right? And we cannot do anything with.
When we say naturally evil, that's not godly.
So we spoke about that already. How evil comes from godliness as well. But yes, correct. For the purposes of our conversation, we'll call it ungodly. Correct, from the back. Godliness from the back, which is the part that God doesn't want us to listen to. Right? And you know what it's like? It's like, we'll end off with this analogy. It's like when you give your children a choice, you really want them to choose one. Right? Because you want to educate them, and you give them a challenge, right? It's up to you. It's up to you. You can choose to give this money to tzedakah, right? Or you could choose to take this money to go buy whatever toy it is that you want in the store, right? Do you want your children to go buy that trinket from the store? You don't want it, right? You clearly want the other one, but you want to give them the choice. You don't want to tell them what to do with it because then it's not valuable, right? Parenting is such a great gift from God as an example for His relationship with us, right? Meaning this challenge that we give the child, right? It's like when, right? It's also used. The parenting is also used as an example for how God hides Himself from us, right? Why don't we see godliness in everything we do, right? Why when we daven don't we feel godliness? We're not pulsated. At least when I daven, we're not pulsated by like, oh my gosh, it's so godly, it's so spiritual, it's everything, right? Why not? Why does God hide Himself from us and make it so hard for us to do it, right? The example given is when a child and a parent play hide and seek, right? So when you play hide and seek with your friends, 2 7-year-olds are playing with each other. Does the 7-year-old want to be found by the other 7-year-old? Of course not. He wants to win the game. The ultimate would be if nobody finds him, right? But when a parent plays with a child, if the child wouldn't find him, the parent would be devastated, right? The parent hides. So why does the parent hide? Just show yourself. No. I want the child to work and to actually find me, right? Mm-hmm. That's how mitzvahs work. That's how good and evil in this world works. God, yes, does God create evil? Yeah, God created evil. Everything comes from godliness, right? It comes in the most backhanded way. He doesn't want to hide from his child. The parent doesn't want to hide from his child. He doesn't want to give the child the opportunity to do something negative, but he gives the child the opportunity to do it in the most begrudging way. Very good. Thank you for the word, Dan. In the most begrudging way possible, he gives that opportunity to the child, and then when the child chooses good, the pleasure for the parent, or the pleasure for God in our case, is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
And with this we conclude chapter 6, Your Darker Side of Jewish Mysticism, Lessons in Tanya.
Thank you.